Hi, I'm David from Portrait Displays, and today we're coming to you from a reference review room here in Hollywood, California, where we're going to calibrate this Sony A95L using Calman. Let's get started. There's a couple things I'd like to do when I first start calibrating a Sony, and that's setting up the display itself. I'm going to hit the gear icon on the remote, and we're going to come over to Settings. Now, one of the things I find interesting is that if you come over to Channel and Inputs, and scroll down to external inputs, you'll notice that on your HDMI signal format here, you have an option for standard format or enhanced format. If you're using modern HDMI sources today, it's going to be better to put these in the enhanced format so that you get the best picture quality from them. So I'm going to go through and set my HDMIs over to the enhanced format. You'll notice on HDMI 3 and 4, we actually have a couple more options. We actually have VRR for gaming. I advise you to, if you are a gamer, to look at what your gaming system will work with best and set it up accordingly. Here, I'm going to set this up for the enhanced format at 4K 120. Okay, now that we have our HDMI input set, we'll press the back button and we'll come down to System. Click on System and scroll down to Power and Energy. Here, we're going to want to select the energy saver and make sure that the power saving is set to off for the calibration process. If you'd like to turn it on after the calibration process, you may do so, but we don't want any energy saving affecting the calibration measurements as we're making them. Let's come back out of the setup menu, hit the gear icon again, and come over to Picture and Sound. And there's a couple things in the Picture and Sound menu we're going to want to adjust. First, let's come down until we see Ambient Optimization Pro. We're going to want to make sure the auto adjust according to ambient light is turned off. Once again, for the calibration, we want to set the white point ourselves. We want to set the luminance ourselves. We don't want the display using a light sensor to also auto adjust it while we're trying to make these measurements. Let's keep going down to the next menu. We come to Expert Panel Settings. You'll notice we have Pixel Shift set to on. This is great to minimize image retention on the panel. And you'll notice on my geometry pattern that I have here, we're actually missing a yellow line across the top because the display is slightly shifting the pixels so that no pixels are excited for too long to reduce image retention. We're going to turn this off, and you'll notice that once we turn it off, we are selected with a warning. We'll change. And you'll notice now that we have all of our pixels going around the display without anything being shifted off. Again, if you plan to have static images on the screen for long periods of time, you may want to have this on to reduce your image retention, but for the calibration process and our purpose here today in this reference review room, we're going to leave it off. Let's back out of the menu. We've now set up the HDMI input. We've set up the energy saving to make sure that that's off. We've turned off the ambient light sensor and we've turned off the pixel shift. Now let's get into our calibration. So I'm going to launch Calman. Let's go to the Google Play Store by pressing the Home button, go over to Apps, come down to Search, and we're going to search for Calman. Click Search.
Results for Calman.
And here we go. Calman for Bravia comes up. First on our search, we're going to walk through accepting the terms, and we'll click Install. Now, while we wait for this to install, you'll notice that I'm using the Portrait Displays C7 HDR colorimeter today. You can also use any colorimeter or spectrophotometer that works with Calman, such as the CR300 from Colorimetry Research or the CR100 from Colorimetry Research. For today's purpose, we're demoing using the Portrait Displays C7 HDR. Calman for Bravia has downloaded. We'll click Open. We get the About Calman for Bravia page that talks a little bit about the application and what it does. We're going to click OK because we do want Calman to be able to connect to the display. Coming back over to Calman, we're going to go up to the main menu, come to Open Workflow Template, Display Specific, and choose the AutoCal Sony Bravia. You'll notice I have the C7 HDR probe positioned on the display. One of the great things about the C7 HDR is it has these alignment markers on the side of the probe where I'm able to put up a crosshatch from my external pattern generator and really align the probe to make sure it's centered as well as leveled with the display by using these alignment markers. Our Calman for Bravia workflow has now been loaded. I'll click on Bravia Calibration and we're going to find our meter. So let's hit Find Meter. I've got all meters selected. We're going to search for our C7 HDR. finds the C7 HDR, and now our next thing is going to be choosing our meter profile. So whenever you're using a colorimeter, you're going to want to have a corresponding meter profile that calibrates the probe to the type of spectral power distribution of the display you're measuring. The Sony A95L is a quantum dot OLED display. As such, I'm going to scroll through my meter profiles, as you can see here. The C7 HDR has a significant amount of profiles for many displays. As we come down, we'll notice we have an OLED quantum dot display from 2022. We're going to use that here today. Next, let's find our pattern source. Today, we're using the SpectraCal VideoForge Pro, so we'll press Find Source, choose the manufacturer as SpectraCal, come down to VideoForge Pro, press Connect. Our VideoForge Pro is now connected. And lastly, we're going to want to connect to the Sony A95L by clicking on Find Display. We already have the manufacturer as Sony. The model is Sony Bravia. We'll type in our IP address, 10.240.2.93. Press Connect. As we can see, we have the Portrait Display C7 HDR colorimeter connected with the OLED Quantum Dot 2022 meter profile. We have the SpectraCal VideoForge Pro connected. I'm going to go through my SpectraCal VideoForge Pro, make sure we're set to window 10% as the workflow instructs. I have a 0.5 second delay. I'm going to set my resolution manually to 3840 by 2160p at 23976. And we'll set our color format to RGB limited 10-bit. We'll leave HDR off for now, and we'll press Next. On the calibration target section of the workflow here, we can change our calibration target if we want to. Right now, the white point is set to D65, the color space is set to Rec 709 sRGB, and the gamma is set to a power function of 2.2. We're going to leave it in the same because the display is going to derive the 2.4 gamma that we're actually targeting from the calibration of 2.2. Let's move forward. Press Next. On the application settings page of the workflow, we're going to set the pattern insertion so that we don't overheat or overcool the panel down. Let's press Set OLED Default here on the right, and Calman is going to insert values that match the best practices for the Sony A95L. Let's press Next. Here, we're going to take our pre-calibration capture. I'm going to press the Read Series button in the bottom right, and Calman is going to go through the process of putting up a pattern, taking a reading, and applying the data so we can ascertain how the display is performing before the calibration. Okay, as we can see, the Sony's tracking a little bit blue, and the EOTF is actually coming out a little bit slower than the target curve, and the color saturation is a little bit oversaturated with a slight hue shift on the magenta and cyan. Let's press Next. At this point, we're going to choose the mode we wish to calibrate using Calman. We have two options, Custom for Pro 1 and Custom for Pro 2. I'm going to currently calibrate the Custom for Pro 1. I'm going to choose the Expert 1 color temperature, but we also have Expert 2, and I'm going to press Reset. This is going to null the display out to a known state so Calman can start from a clean slate as it performs the calibration. Okay, now that the reset's been done in Calman, we're going to check a couple things in the menu to make sure they're exactly where we want them to be. I'm going to hit the gear icon. We're going to go back to Picture and Sound, choose Picture. Brightness, we're actually going to set a little bit later in the workflow, but let's go to contrast and set this up to max. We're going to do that so that the Calman adjustment points and the points inside the Sony line up to provide the best calibration results. Now, we're going to take the gamma curve, which is currently set to -2, and change that to 0. We're going to change it to 0 because from the factory, 0 is actually an approximate 2.2 EOTF or gamma curve. Even though we're targeting 2.4 later on our workflow for BT709, we'll set this to 0, and then later we'll be able to set it to -2, which will take it back to 2.4. Let's back out of the menu, and now let's press Next. Here, we're going to set our luminance. I'll hit Read Single in the bottom right-hand corner. Currently, Calman is measuring 149.2 nits. Now my ultimate target is going to be BT709 at 100 nits because we're in this reference review room. We've set contrast up to help align the points in Calman for the calibration process, but we're also going to have a correction from the white point. If you look at the workflow, it talks about adjusting the peak white for your display about 15% brighter. So I'm actually going to want to go a little bit brighter than that 120 nits because of the contrast adding the additional boost. So let's target maybe 135 to 140 nits. I'm going to click on the Auto Cal button on the bottom right. I'm going to set my white level target from 120 to 135, and I'm going to press OK. Now Calman is going to go through a process of putting up the pattern, taking the reading, and adjusting the brightness for me to hit my 135 nit target. So we've now hit our luminance target of 134.9 nits, about 135, and it took us 27 seconds and about 7 reads to do. Press OK. Now let's go to the next page. Here, we're on our Grayscale AutoCal page. This is where Calman's going to track the EOTF or gamma along with the white point that we've targeted. Press the AutoCal button in the bottom right. We have 20 points selected. The Custom for Pro one that's unlocked by using the Calman for Bravia app actually gives us extra grayscale control points for us to calibrate. We'll leave our delta E target for the purpose of this demo at 0.5, and we'll press OK. Now Calman's going to go through the process of putting up a pattern, taking a reading, and adjusting the multi-point grayscale within the Sony to our desired target. Now please keep in mind we are in a room where we have turned on a lot of lights to shoot the video, and we may get some errors near black because of that. We may not. Let's see how the results come out. Okay, so our calibration of our grayscale completed successfully at 3 minutes and 11 seconds with a total amount of reads of 60. Let's hit the next button in the bottom right and look at the next page of the workflow. Here, we're going to adjust our color management system, or CMS. This is going to try to fine-tune the colorimetry of the display to hit the BT709 target. Let's press the AutoCal button in the bottom right. We'll leave these at the 75% default. We'll keep our delta E target at 0.5, and we'll press OK. Okay, our CMS calibration is completed in 1 minute 49 seconds with a total amount of reads of 51. Let's press OK. And now let's hit the next button in the bottom right corner to go to the next page of the workflow. Okay, our last stage here of the calibration process is going to be to verify luminance. But there's a couple things I'm going to want to change because of what I'm targeting within Calman. You'll find this very interesting. We're going to press the gear icon, press picture and sound, select picture, come down to brightness. You'll notice that Calman has set this back to 90 in contrast SDR from the max. And now gamma's at 0. Since we're targeting BT709 2.4 as our final calibration target, we're going to set this back down to -2. That's going to reduce a little bit of luminance here. Now we'll back out of the menu. And my calibration target, because we're in this reference review room, is going to be 100. So we'll come down to the AutoCal button in the bottom right, set the white level target to 100, and press OK. Okay, our calibration completed successfully. The time elapsed is 14 seconds, total reads of 5. Let's press OK, press Next, and now we're at our post-calibration capture. Since I'm calibrating for a BT709 2.4 target, I want to come up here to my gear icon and change my power to 2.4. Okay, Calman has now been updated for BT709 at 2.4, so let's come down to the bottom and hit Read Series. As you can see, our RGB balance has been corrected to D65. Our EOTF is tracking as we expect. We're hitting that 99.79 nits on our luminance, right at that 100 nit target that we're targeting. Max delta E2000 on the colorimetry is 1.9 with an average of 0.1. Now, I'd like to see what's going on with that colorimetry. So I'm going to come over to the left, and I'm going to come down to our color checker in the additional validation. Let's press Read Series in the bottom right, and let's see how the chromaticity is mapping throughout the color volume. As we can see from the color checker results here, the chromaticity mapping is excellent throughout most of the range. You'll notice that on the red, we have a little oversaturation on the edge, as well as the green and the blue, which leads to a little bit of oversaturation here on the magenta. We're also seeing some slight shifting inside the gamut here in the bottom right with red. If you'd like to tweak this a little bit more manually, you can come up to the DDC controls, choose the gamut adjustments, and adjust the hue, saturation, and luminance for each color. These are the adjustments provided to us. As such, remember that these controls are going to adjust the red in its entirety. So you may find that while you bring in that 100% saturation, you're then desaturating the colors inside the gamut, which may affect flesh tones. It's often better to target more accuracy around the range of flesh tones and neutral colors versus targeting the edge of the gamut, since those are going to be colors that aren't used as much in content. Let's press next. Here we can press read series on the saturation sweep to determine how each color channel is performing at different levels. Notice once again that our saturation sweeps have come out excellent. Where we're seeing the error is towards the edge of the red tracking, the magenta tracking at the edge, the blue. It tends to be further on the outer side of the gamut. The results are still excellent, and I don't think that I'd adjust the red to try and bring it in, because again, I'm going to bring in this red right here in the inner portion that's going to then affect my flesh tones significantly, and flesh tones are something you really want to make sure you get right. If we look at our Delta E2000, we'll notice a max of 1.9, still an excellent result, with an average of 0.6. Let's come over to the left side and choose alternative targets. Here, we're going to be able to measure the HDR mode by setting the colorimetry to Rec 2020, the EOTF to ST284 HDR, and changing the color space from sRGB BT709 to BT2020 in Calman. This is now going to change the color space on the display to BT2020. If we come over to the display and we press the gear icon, we select picture and sound, we'll now notice that we're in the Custom for Pro 1, and if we come down to brightness, you'll see we're in HDR. Calman is now sending an HDR signal into the display. We've set our Calman target for ST24, Rec 2020, and we've set the color space within the display to BT2020. Let's take a look by pressing Read Series. Okay, as we can see, the panel is tracking the PQ curve pretty well. There is a little bit of lift in the black here right at the bottom, but again, we are shooting in a very brightly lit room. We've got some lights flooding the screen. That light may be affecting our black reading, which is maybe lifting it up just a little bit. So I wouldn't take this too much as gospel here, because we do have a non-ideal environment. The RGB balance looks pretty good here. Our Delta E2000 is a max 1.3 with an average of 0.6, and our colorimetry on the Delta E2000 has a max 1.8 with an average 1.2. And again, we can see we have a little bit of saturation issue here on the red, but we did see that in the SDR where we had a little bit of mismatch with the red, so I'm not too worried about that here. It looks like it's translating over. So now we've calibrated the SDR BT709 at 2.4 for 100 nits, and we've also shown that when you calibrate the SDR mode on the Sony, the HDR mode is derived from that, and we've performed that validation. Now let's go back to the start of the workflow and do a slightly different process to calibrate for Dolby Vision. Here, I'm going to choose Welcome, go to the Bravia Calibration. Now we're already connected to our meter, we're connected to our generator, and we're connected to our display. I'm going to make sure the SpectraCal VideoForge Pro, by pressing Open Panel Settings, is now set back into the SDR mode. I'm going to come over to my display, press the gear icon, select Picture and Sound, come down to Picture, and now instead of saying Custom for Pro 1, I'm going to change this to Custom for Pro 2, and I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to come down to my color, change my color temperature to Expert 2. Now I'm showing you this in the menu. You can also do it within Calman when we press Next. For our calibration targets here, we're actually going to target the white point offset that Sony typically uses. We're going to change this to 3067, 3180, and now we're targeting the Rec 709 sRGB color space with a power function of 2.2, and the 3067 3180 Sony offset for the display. On this page for our application settings, we'll ensure that our OLED default pattern insertion is turned on. Press Next. Okay, on the display reset page, we're going to set the display to Custom for Pro 2, color temperature Expert 2. We'll press the reset. And now there's one more thing we're going to want to do after we've reset the display. I'm going to press the gear icon, come back to Picture and Sound, choose Picture. I'm in Custom for Pro 2. My brightness is at max. I'm going to bring that contrast back up to 100 like we did before. I'm going to take Gamma SDR back to 0 for 2.2. Leave the black level at 50, and I'm going to come down here to peak luminance SDR. What you're seeing is this is currently at off. I'm going to bring this all the way up to high, so that the panel is going to be in the state it's going to be in when we're watching Dolby Vision content. Now I'm going to back out of the menu. Let's press next in the Calman workflow. And once again, we're on the luminance page. We're not going to want to adjust the luminance here. We're going to want to keep it in that maximum light output mode because we are targeting for Dolby Vision. So let's press next. And now we're on the Grayscale Auto Cal menu. So let's hit Auto Cal in the bottom right-hand corner. We're at active grayscale points 20, Delta E target 0.5, and let's press OK. All right, so our auto calibration is completed. It took 3 minutes and 22 seconds. Total reads 76. So let's press OK. And now let's go to the next page of the workflow. And now let's do our CMS calibration. I'm going to right-click here on the history one, hit Clear Tab Data. You don't have to do this, but I like to do it because we're recording this video. Now I'm going to come down the bottom right and press Auto Cal. We'll leave all of these at their default, 75%, Delta E target 0.5, and let's press OK. Okay, our CMS is completed successfully. It took 1 minute 51 seconds, total reads 69. Let's press OK. And now we're going to go a little bit offbeat here because we are doing Dolby Vision. So I actually want to do my verification Dolby Vision. I'm going to go to the post-cal capture and I'm going to come over here to History 1, right-click it. I'm going to hit Clear Tab Data. And now I'm going to target for Dolby Vision within Calman. So let's come up to the SpectraCal VideoForge Pro. We're going to change the HDR setting to Dolby Vision. We're going to take the Dolby Vision mode and change it to absolute. And in Calman, we're going to go to the gear icon and choose D65P3 and the ST2084 HDR PQ curve. We're going to click on bit level 64 here in the bottom left to send the metadata from Dolby Vision to the display to make sure we're in the Dolby Vision mode. So before we do our post-calibration capture, let's press the gear icon to go back into the menu, select Picture and Sound, select Picture, and now we're in the picture mode Dolby Vision Dark. Let's come down to brightness. You'll see we're at brightness, HDR max, contrast HDR at 90, gamma HDR at 0, leave it at 0. HDR tone mapping, we're going to now set to gradation preferred, black level state 50, peak luminance in high. Let's also come down to color, because what happens is when we calibrate the Sony in Expert 2 via Calman, remember we're calibrating the SDR mode, and Dolby Vision can select a different color temperature. So if you want this to be on Expert 2, you're going to have to manually come into the menu like we're doing now and change this over to Expert 2. So now what we've done is we've put this in Expert 2, which is what we calibrated for Dolby Vision. We've turned the gradation preferred on, and we're ready to take our post-calibration readings. So exit out of the menu, and now let's come down to the bottom right-hand corner here and hit Read Series. Okay, so we've taken our post-calibration readings, and now what you'll notice is the grayscale is tracking very well across the RGB balance. Keep in mind that while we targeted the 3067 3180 Sony offset for the panel, we're actually targeting in Calman D65P3. So we are hitting the standard reference for Dolby Vision on the Sony A95L, just as we would use in this reference environment here in Hollywood, California. And we are tracking the ST2084 curve very well. We have a slight lift near that black again, just like HDR, but I just suspect that that's from these very bright lights that we're shining on the screen that are contaminating that perfect black reading. The colorimetry is tracking excellent. The next thing I like to do is press the gear icon on the Sony, select Picture and Sound, and show that we're in the picture mode for Dolby Vision Dark. And if we come down to color, our color temperature is Expert 2. Now I'm going to take our VideoForge Pro here in Calman and change it back to SDR by selecting off and then loading black here in the bottom left-hand corner. Okay, there's one more thing we're going to have to do to get all of our calibration modes tied in so that they work together and the user has a seamless experience. Let's press the gear icon on the Sony. We'll select Picture and Sound, select Picture, come down to brightness, and you'll see that we're in Dolby Vision Dark, and all of our settings are here, gradation preferred, highlight output. Let's come down to color, and now we'll see we're in Expert 2. But what happens now is if the user of the display changes their source so that it's in SDR mode, it'll come back to Custom Pro 2 because that's how we calibrated SDR when we were optimizing for Dolby Vision. So now I'm going to come into the SpectraCal VideoForge Pro, come down to HDR, change it to off, select the brightness pattern in the bottom left-hand corner, And now the display is going to go back into an SDR mode. What we'll notice is we are in that Custom Pro 2. Let's change this back to Custom Pro 1, brightness at 40, contrast 90, gamma -2, peak luminance SDR, and our color is in Expert 1. So now when a customer is in SDR, which is in Custom for Pro 1 mode, and they go to a source that's in Dolby Vision, we'll come back to SpectraCal Video Forge Pro, change this to Dolby Vision, select the black patch in the bottom right-hand corner. You'll notice it comes into Dolby Vision Dark, and we should now be in Expert 2. So what we've done here today is calibrate the display in Custom for Pro 1 for SDR and HDR, and then calibrate the display in Custom for Pro 2 in the Expert 2 mode, so that a user can now watch SDR, HDR, or Dolby Vision, and the display will automatically switch between the modes, and they have D65 as their white point, so they can enjoy a reference image. There's a couple of other caveats with the Sony, as there are with many displays. The first one is you're going to want to make sure that any inputs or sources that you're using on the Sony have the same calibration settings we just did here. Therefore, you may want to go to HDMI 2, HDMI 3, HDMI 4, and make sure that any of the settings you've set up are in those modes to ensure that you're getting the most accurate picture for all of your sources. The next caveat that we have is you don't want to uninstall that Calman for Bravia app. If we take another look at the menu and we press this gear icon, come down to Picture and Sound, select Picture, come down to that color, and let's look at Advanced Color Adjustment Expert 2. You'll see here in the Advanced Color Temperature settings, the 20 point, and you'll notice that we have a bunch of adjustments in the menu as we have now. Let's go back to our home mode, arrow over to the settings, arrow down to the accounts and sign in, choose your account and arrow down to remove. Remove my account, and now it's going to erase data from the internal shared storage. If we hit erase everything to log out of your account, and when you erase your account, it's going to erase the Calman for Bravia application, which is going to erase your calibration settings. As such, when you do want to perform a calibration using the Calman for Bravia app, make sure you're downloading it on your primary account. You can always add other accounts to the display, but if you remove it, you'll lose your calibration. That's all we have today on the Sony A95L. We hope you enjoyed our video. We'll see you on the next one.